Have you ever noticed that some bottles say whiskey while others say whiskey? At first glance, it looks like someone simply forgot an E. But that tiny letter has sparked debates among drink lovers for generations. Is one better than the other? Are they completely different drinks, or is it just a spelling preference? The answer is more interesting than you might expect. That single letter reflects centuries of history, national traditions, and even a bit of friendly rivalry. So today, let's uncover why some bottles proudly say whiskey with an E, others insist on whiskey without an E, and what actually separates these famous spirits. Right here, on History of Simple Things. The story begins more than 1,000 years ago. Distillation techniques were developed in the Middle East before spreading across Europe through monks and scholars during the medieval period. In Ireland and Scotland, monks began distilling fermented grain into a spirit that was originally used for medicinal purposes. The drink was called Uisce Beatha in Irish Gaelic and Uisce Beatha in Scottish Gaelic, both meaning water of life. Over hundreds of years, those difficult-to-pronounce names gradually evolved into the word we know today, whiskey or whiskey. By the 1700s and 1800s, both Ireland and Scotland had thriving whiskey industries. As their products spread around the world, the spelling itself began to change, eventually becoming a way to distinguish one tradition from another. So why does one have an E? The simplest answer is geography. Scotland, Canada, and Japan generally spell it whiskey without an E. Meanwhile, Ireland and the United States usually spell it whiskey with an E. This difference became more noticeable during the late 19th century. Irish distillers wanted to separate their products from many lower-quality Scotch whiskies that were flooding some export markets at the time. Adding the E helped signal that their whiskey followed Irish traditions. When Irish immigrants later settled in America, they brought that spelling with them. American distillers adopted it, and over time, whiskey became the standard spelling in the United States. So in most cases, the spelling tells you more about where the spirit comes from than what's actually inside the bottle. Do they taste different? Not necessarily. Many people assume whiskey and whiskey are made from completely different ingredients. But that's not true. Both begin with grains, water, and yeast. The grains are fermented, distilled, and then aged in wooden barrels. What changes the flavor isn't the spelling, it's the production methods. Scottish whiskey often emphasizes malted barley and may have smoky flavors if peat is used during the drying process. However, not every Scotch is smoky. Many are fruity, floral, or rich with notes of honey and vanilla. Irish whiskey is often distilled 3 times, although not always, which can produce a smoother and lighter character. It typically has less smoky flavor because peat is rarely used for drying the barley. American whiskey includes several distinct styles. Bourbon must contain at least 51% corn and is aged in new charred oak barrels, giving it sweet notes of caramel and vanilla. Rye whiskey contains a high percentage of rye grain, creating a spicier flavor. So while certain regions have recognizable styles, the spelling alone doesn't determine how a drink will taste. Another major difference lies in government regulations. To be labeled Scotch whiskey, the spirit must be distilled and aged in Scotland for at least 3 years in oak casks. The production methods are protected by strict laws. Irish whiskey also has legal standards. It must be distilled and matured on the island of Ireland for at least 3 years in wooden casks. American whiskey follows its own regulations depending on the style. Bourbon, Tennessee whiskey, rye whiskey, and other varieties each have specific legal requirements covering ingredients, aging, and production. These rules help preserve regional identities and ensure consumers know exactly what they're buying. What about Japanese whiskey? One reason Japanese whiskey has become so respected is its close connection to Scottish traditions. In the early 1900s, Japanese chemist Masataka Taketsuru traveled to Scotland to study whiskey making firsthand. After returning to Japan, he helped establish a whiskey industry that carefully adapted Scottish methods while developing its own unique character. Today, Japanese whiskey is known for balance, elegance, and precision. Although it follows the Scottish spelling without the E, its flavors are distinctly its own, often featuring delicate fruit, subtle oak, and refined complexity. So, which one is correct? Here's the surprising part: both are correct. If you're talking generally about the spirit, you'll often see writers use whichever spelling matches the specific country they're discussing. A bottle from Scotland is correctly called Scotch whiskey, while one from Ireland is correctly called Irish whiskey. There are even a few exceptions. Some American brands, like Maker's Mark, intentionally spell their product whiskey without the E as part of their branding and heritage. Likewise, not every distillery follows the majority convention of its country. So while geography is a useful guide, the label on the bottle is always the final authority. In the end, the difference between whiskey and whiskey is less about one being better than the other and more about history, culture, and tradition. A single letter tells the story of centuries of craftsmanship, national identity, and evolving techniques passed down through generations. So the next time you spot that missing or extra E on a bottle, you'll know it isn't a typo. It's a small clue pointing to where that spirit came from, the traditions behind its production, and the long journey that transformed the ancient water of life into one of the world's most celebrated drinks. Thank you for watching. If you have suggestions for our next video, feel free to share them in the comments below. We'll be sure to give you an acknowledgement for your contribution. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the history of simple things. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories woven through the smallest details.